This is Latina Approved, and we have a very special guest with us today. I'm Tani Steffi, co-founder of Latina Approved.
And I'm MariVi, the other co-founder of Latina Approved.
And today, our very special guest is Maria Lopez Twena. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Yes, of course, yes.
And she is the author of School Crossing, and we're super excited to introduce her and have her tell us a little bit more about herself and how this amazing book came about.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, so I am a second generation Latina, meaning I was born here. My parents were both foreign born. And I was born in Miami, but I was raised in New Orleans. And I was raised in the late 60s, early 70s, and we were very much the minority in our neighborhood. It was a non-Hispanic white neighborhood. People didn't know what to make of us. They knew we spoke a different language and that we had olive skin, and they didn't quite know what bucket to put us in. And as I was being raised, I was growing up in a home that was very Latino, where the ethos was all about collectivism. It was all about community and family. That's what's most important. And then I'd go to my American school, and underlying my teachings there was all about being self-reliant and independent, not interdependent, which is how I was being raised at home. And you know, there was a lot of culture clash at the time. And of course, I had no lexicon to put words around what I was going through. But as you're growing up and you've got two completely different languages and two completely different cultures that actually clash with each other because they're teaching you two separate things, it creates chaos. So I definitely felt that growing up. And it took me 40 years to realize one day that when I was acting independently, like I was at school taught to act, and I would come home and wanted to act independently, my mother would tell me, "Mira que eres egoísta, why you're being so selfish." And I didn't understand that she was seeing it through the lens of collectivism. I just felt that I was doing something wrong. So I think I studied psychology to understand that whole upbringing, which was a wonderful upbringing, but that culture clash was definitely there. And then I got a graduate degree in film and television communication. And then I embarked in the world of marketing, did general market advertising for 20 years. And about 14 years ago, pivoted to the Hispanic market, realizing that how can I be in the marketing business when I'm not loyal to brands because no one is really speaking to me? You know, I tell people I'm not Marsha Brady from the Brady Bunch, but I'm certainly not Veronica, the damsel in distress in the Univision telenovela. I live in the middle, and no one really saw me. And I started doing research, and it all leads back to this book. Years ago, I did some research while I was at a big agency network, and our thesis was pretty simple. It was like, brands need to pay attention to us because as children of immigrants, we play the role of Sherpa for our foreign-born family members. We translate the language. We interpret the U.S. ethos, which is about independence, not interdependence. We inform brand and product purchases at a very early age. We translate, we demystify, we do a lot of different things. And yet brands weren't really speaking to us because they were seeing the world as black or white, English or Spanish. As I look back on my childhood, as I was working through all of this, I realized, had I seen myself in literature as a child, I think my life would have been different. It would have been better, but I never saw myself in literature or in the media for that matter. And because of that, I felt maybe kids today, as bicultural as we've all become as a nation, need to see themselves early on in an authentic way that organically depicts what it's like to grow up in a multi-generational household where you have a conflicting set of values than the society you live in a different language than the society you live in. And that was the premise for MariVi. This is one of many books. She's called MariVi, and the whole series is called the Master Navigator series because that's what MariVi does. She navigates, as many of you who are probably listening to this do as well for your families. We play that role, and it's a longitudinal series in the sense that it starts in first grade, which is why it's called School Crossing, which for many of us, that's where the first culture shock kicks in. Oh my God, they changed my name. I don't even know who I am anymore. My lunch is different. In her first grade, the teacher asked the kids to draw a self-portrait, and she's the only one who draws a portrait of her family, not herself, because she hasn't separated from her family. She's part of a collective. So the whole objective of the series, which will be in video too, is really to let children know you matter, you are seen, you are not alone. Here's a character who has lived your life experience and the universal truths that you're going to go through, and let her help you as you grow up.
No, thank you, Maria, for that. You hit so many like different topics, right? And we can break it all out, because I feel like there's so many points that maybe as bilingual, bicultural Latinos, children of immigrants, and honestly, it can even apply to like a universal standpoint where it's about children of immigrants, right? Where we're living in these two different worlds. And in a Hispanic or for a Latino culture, you can be seen as egoísta or selfish when you make independent choices, which then leads to that guilt you have as, you know, as a second generation. And it is a multi-generational home for the most part, where you have your grandparents. That's one generation. Then you have your own parents, and then you have you know, yourself here in America. And I feel like we have been underrepresented and overseen for so many years, especially if we talk about like what's out in the media or marketing aspect. There is this whole generation of us who were like, wait, what about us? What about the bilingual?
Exactly.
Both languages. And in the beginning of the book, in the beginning of the first chapter, I believe, you mentioned how MariVi, right? And I can see myself through the lenses of MariVi, because up to this date it's true, where MariVi speaks to her parents and grandparents only in Spanish, but then in the outside world, it's English. And up to this date, that's still my story. That's still who I am. At home, 100% English. Outside, maybe Spanglish and English. So I think that's so relatable, just from a language standpoint, if we want to start off with that.
Agreed. Yeah, the language is everything, you know. And in my family, we were 5 kids, and the kids, because we were raised in a city that there weren't many Hispanics there, and we didn't want to be outsiders there as well. But you're an outsider at home, you're an outsider at school. Where do you really belong? The siblings, we always spoke English to each other. So in the house, it was Spanish to the parents, Spanish to abuelita, Spanish to any relative that would come to the house that was Hispanic, first generation. But amongst ourselves, we always spoke English to each other. And Spanish later in life became our secret tool, where if we wanted to make a comment about someone and it wasn't a nice comment, you'd say it in Spanish, and it was like our little secret.
Yeah, no, it's so funny and relatable, because sometimes it's like, te lo voy a decir en español.
Totally.
I didn't learn English until I went to kindergarten. I didn't go to preschool, and I would pick up on things from the TV or like shows, but I didn't really learn how to speak English until kindergarten. So that was just a culture shock for me. I don't know how my brain even did that, but I grew up in a predominantly Latino community, so I wasn't the only one. But having had a book like this, or more conversations being had about our experiences, definitely wouldn't have felt so alone, or like I didn't belong. And you see that so much in this book about how MariVi was shy or embarrassed about the type of lunch she was bringing, about, I think, the necklace she was wearing. She wanted to hide that. And I think that a lot of us can relate to it, but a lot of us aren't recognizing how many of these cultural moments we share until now, because we were so like shy to talk about them as we were going through it, because we didn't see anything that represented us at the time. So this is amazing.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true, Lily. Yeah, there's so many cultural moments that we've experienced, all of us as a collective. And it's interesting because what we don't share, we keep inside, and that's not a good thing. And, when I studied psychology, they always said, get people to write. And one of the big ahas for me was, in my mind, I always thought, it was like, get them to write like cursive, like write about anything, but get them to put it in a diary or in a notepad of some sort. And I didn't realize until after I finished the first couple of these books, what a catharsis it was just to write about it. And it was very emotional for me. And it's like, wow, I have buried all of this for so long, and the feelings of insecurity and the feelings of loneliness and the feelings of being an outsider and never belonging, never really quite belonging. It's like, for Americans, I was Hispanic. For Hispanics, muy americana. It's like, well, what, I mean, the Latina, yeah, everyone says that, but it creates instability if you really think about it, because you're constantly juggling, one world or another world, one language or another language. Now, there's been research that says that's also our secret weapon. It makes us better executives because we can process multiple stimuli concurrently like no one else's business, right? Because we're always reading and processing, not just verbal, but nonverbal, especially with Spanish, where the language and all Romance languages, they tend to be so nonverbal. So you're picking up a lot of that. So I think it becomes our superpower. It ultimately becomes MariVi's superpower, but getting to the superpower is very painful.
Yes. No, I totally agree with you. It's like the beauty of our superpower is really understanding that individualistic and collectivist mentality and space, right? We're able to understand the American perspective on how to approach, even in a business setting. We know how Americans think and develop, and because essentially we are part of that as well. And we also
Totally.
have our Latino roots, our Latin perspective, which up to this day, I feel like, and maybe you guys tell me, and maybe those that are listening and watching this can relate, where we still hold to some of those traditional values that have been instilled in us. And, sometimes it's good. And sometimes, it could be a rough patch to get over, sometimes like guilt, like making it about yourself. Sometimes it's like, whoa, I feel guilty not doing this, involving my parents or whatever the decision may be. But it's just very interesting. And I feel like MariVi definitely sheds a light to that. There's a part in the book, and I shared this before with Maria and Lily, but I'll share it here for those of you watching. When I was in the third grade, and MariVi actually, she talks about her name was changed to Mari Paz or Mary Paz, maybe, So her name was shortened because as Latinos, we tend to have like our first name, middle name, last name, mother's last name, right? Maiden name. So same case for me. And my name is Tanya, right? Tanya. And my third grade teacher, non-Latino, decided to call me Tania. So up until middle school, my name was Tania because my classmates grew up learning my name as Tania. And as MariVi, I was afraid to raise my hand and say, hey, that's not my name. She was afraid. And in the book, MariVi talks about how she was afraid to stand up and say, hey, I have a question. She didn't know what self-portrait was, So same thing happened to me in regards to my name as well. I was afraid to say, it's actually Tanya. I couldn't find the courage to do that. But because you want to fit in, I felt like by accepting that as a kid, I was fitting in and I was being cool and probably recognized by my American peers versus just saying like, hey, I'm Tanya, but who really teaches you these things? You don't, you learn along the way.
Oh, it's so true. It's so true. And just what you said earlier about the guilt, right? There's a lot of guilt that we're raised with. And it sometimes it's shared even unconsciously, but sometimes it's shared as a tool. We came for the kids to have a better life, the immigrant story. So because of all of that, you feel guilty when you start making more money than your parents, or you want to buy yourself something nice. I'm going to buy myself a car and it's nicer than mom and dad's car. You almost struggle to how to tell them, or you're going to go to a 4-star vacation somewhere. There's guilt tied to all of that. So there's a lot of guilt that I think we all have that gets buried in parts of us. Also, the part about not wanting to raise your hand, I think, is so much about not wanting to stand up and call attention to yourself, because you're not really on a steady footing, right? You're just kind of like here or there. This is your first experience. You're at school, especially at school, where you're surrounded by people you don't know, and we all just want to fit in. At the end of the day, that's all we really want. But your comment also about the American society is so different, than our society in so many ways, and everything is reflected back in it. So I shared this story. I think your viewers might appreciate it. When I was in first grade and my sister was in third grade, she came home from school and she said, "Oh, I'm going to my friend's house this weekend." Oh, I said, "What's going on at your friend's house?" She said, "She's having a garage sale." And I was in first grade, and my response was, "I thought you had to sell the whole house. I didn't know you could just sell the garage." Because Latinos, we don't do garage sales, right? I mean, it's like there's always someone in the family or another immigrant or someone who needs your stuff. You don't need to sell it. Fulanito needs it, right? So even that's part of the culture, right? Even that's part of the culture. Americans tend to dress more for comfort. They're very self-reliant. They want to be comfortable. First generation Hispanics dress for appearances because they are dressing for the collective, because they are a reflection of the collective, and it impacts every day of your life, whether you're aware of it or not. It impacts how you go about decision making. um, um, it's a very interesting phenomenon. And once you're aware of it, it's just great because you kind of turn it on and you go, "Oh, that's why she said that," or "That's why he said that," or "That's why he's doing that," because you see it based on an acculturation model. So you think they're coming from it from this way. And once you understand it, it makes life easier because you yourself then can navigate better because you understand the source of the activity or the event or whatever is happening.
No, absolutely. I agree. I feel like knowing this and being aware of this has really helped me like navigate even my conversations with my parents and my, extended family that are first generation, where it's like, well, I understand your mindset and now I understand why growing up I was probably seen as the rebelde, but it wasn't necessarily that I was rebelde because I didn't do anything that was bad necessarily, but it was more the mindset. I was learning, how you said, to be independent, and they saw it as you're being a rebel. I'm like, no, I'm just being equal.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's so
yes.
hard. Like, not to, you have to be very careful how you speak to your parents, how you speak to your family members, because you don't want to disrespect them, right? Because if your any kind of challenge seems like a disrespect, and it's like, no, let's just be a little bit more open-minded. As being the firstborn in my family, I remember like trying to move out was just, what do you mean move out? Like, you don't move out until you're married. Like,
Oh, yes.
so just
Yes.
there's just so many challenges that a lot of us can relate on.
Isn't that so
Oh,
scary?
totally.
Like, I'm gonna move out, and it's like such a scary thing to address.
Oh, yes, that one is super scary. As a child, I remember our friends in the neighborhood would go play and they were barefoot. Oh my gosh. And if you took off your shoes and you were descalza, forget it. I mean, that was like, for us, it was like, oh, why don't you have shoes? We can afford shoes. It's taken through a whole different perspective. And sleepovers, the first sleepover was just like a nuclear bomb had exploded in our house. It was like, sleepover, ¿para qué tú tienes casa? It just becomes this whole thing.
Yes.
It's like, no, it's okay. They do that here, yeah, it's really nice to be on the other side of it and to use that experience to help others navigate. It really is, because it's like, that's the whole purpose, right? We go through things to help others. That's the blessing in it.
Yes. No, and you know what, Maria? There was a part that made me laugh. I wasn't expecting it when I was reading the book, where MariVi is having lunch with her classmates, and she sees that they all have chocolate chip cookies. And it just dawned on me when I was reading it, I don't like cookies. I'm not like a cookie person. Like, I just never like cookies. And I'm like, oh my God, my mom never baked cookies. She baked other stuff. She did flans, she did pan,
Yes.
she did pan dulce. And I was like, oh my God, this is so relatable. It's so hilarious. And I'm like, that makes sense. At least from my perspective.
Well, I've always thought that as a child, that, food, yes, it means a lot to the culture, but it's also part of fitting in, right? So it was always flying, or dulce de coco. There was always some dessert that wasn't like your typical American dessert. And when friends would come over after school or something, they had some, it was like, oh, this is different. And you think there's judgment there, right? And so I remember as a child thinking, when I grew up, I'm going to make homemade chocolate chip cookies once a week. And because for me, you don't think about it, but it's also an assimilation point. It's like, you may feel more American if you're eating these cookies, right? And when you're a child, that's what you want, because you don't want to be left out and you just want to belong. And when you're growing up, it's about the friends, right? So yeah, the food is fascinating, because there's so much to be in the food and in the music and what you listen to, and what you turn away from and what you only go back to. One of the things in my studies that I have found fascinating is that most, if not all, children of immigrants go through this process where the childhood, and of course it'll depend where you grew up, but your childhood is spent pushing away from the things that make you unique, because it makes you not belong, only to come back to it much later in life. And that process of retroacculturation typically happens, it's triggered by a key life event, the birth of a child, the death of a parent, a marriage, a divorce, you buy your first house. All of that just stirs up stuff. And then you go back to your roots, but you come back a different person because you've lived moving away from it. I don't know if that makes sense. So that's when you really start embracing the totality of who you are.
100%. And I'll share this because we're on the topic, and it's something that I've been thinking about, right? So I had a great childhood. My parents were great, and I understand the different perspectives, but something that I was never able to pinpoint, and which is why I rebelled, was the idea of porque él es hombre, right? Growing up with a brother that's only a year older than me, it was like he was able to do so many things that I couldn't do. But and every time I would question it, the answer was like, porque él es hombre, porque él es hombre. And I feel like now in my adult life, we're doing Latina approved, like that has had so many impact, where it isn't a woman empowerment brand, that I feel like it's come back to me where I'm like, no, yes, you are a woman, but you can do anything you want to do. You can reach your goals and you are capable. So I'm like,
totally, porque eres Latina. Yes. It's not Latino approved.
It's Latina approved.
Exactly.
So true. The whole world of calladita te ves más bonita it doesn't apply here. No.
Exactly. So for me, that was just like, whoa, like, I think this is why I do what I do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
tell us what's next for MariVi? What can we expect?
Oh, I've got so many stories written. I'm going to get them out in the next couple of months. They take a while to get designed and published. And the video series is going to premiere on Nuestra TV, which is a streaming app that's going to be launching on September 7th. And it's been created for the Hispanic market, but not any segment in particular, for this market across acculturation levels, across linguistic proficiency. So we're going to have English content, we're going to have Spanish content, and we're going to have bilingual content for the bilingual, created by the bilingual. It's also going to have a bilingual footprint. So when you see English movies and TVs and what have you, it'll have Spanish subtitles, and the Spanish ones will have English. So in many ways, we want to be the bridge for the community because of all the disparity that we just talked about. The changes in the culture as the generations move on, and the lack of understanding sometimes because you don't understand the language, or because there are other issues that fail. You can't communicate with other members of the family. We want to be the bridge for that. We want to facilitate that. So I'm super excited.
Love that. No, we're super excited as well.
And can't wait.
Yeah. Nuestra TV and MariVi are Latina approved. And we can't
yay.
There you go.
MariVi's journey.
Thank you, Lily. Thank you, Tanya. Super excited. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you really so much for joining us.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure.
So much.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm sure there'll be more to come about MariVi.
Yes, and if anyone wants to get the book or actually look at questions about the stories, you can go to wearemarivi.com, because all of us are MariVi. All children of immigrants are. So if you go to wearemarivi.com, you'll find Q&A there that you can share. And I got to tell you, it has resonated outside of the Hispanic market. Tanya, to your earlier point, I've had a little boy tell me that he was MariVi. I've had an Egyptian immigrant tell me she was MariVi. And it warms my heart, because kids can relate to it outside of ethnicity or gender. And that's really important for me.
That's amazing. Absolutely. Absolutely. We encourage that. That's amazing.
Thank you. Well, thank you, ladies.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. I feel like we could always talk for days. And
We
days.
need to do this every week. And by the way, you guys are MariVi approved. I forgot to tell you that.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. Love it.
I love it. Thank you so much.